Hi, welcome. My name is Dr. Paul Shawler. I'm the Chief Psychologist for the Office of Juvenile Affairs, and I'm also an Assistant Professor at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. I appreciate the opportunity to create this online training for you today, and I hope that you find your career within serving children, youth, and families highly rewarding as I do. Today, I will be talking about adolescent development. Not only that, but I'll be speaking about how adolescent development, trauma, family impact, and intervention can better serve our communities and produce positive outcomes for children and families. And so as I continue through this training, please think about the children and families that you work with on a daily basis. Thinking about how court, judges, attorneys, direct care staff, mental health professionals, how everyone can make a positive influence in the life of children. I titled this presentation, The Promise of Adolescence, because it's through our responses that we're able to raise children into healthy adults. And so as we dig in, again, I encourage you to also think about opportunities that you had when you were a child. Who were the people that impacted you the most? Was it your family? Was it your teachers at school? Did you go to therapy or counseling and have a clinician that was able to share new insights and help you through that turbulent adolescent period? Think about the opportunities that you had, whether it be graduating from high school or getting your first job. How can we become those mentors that strongly influenced us to get us on a positive trajectory? While all of the kids that we work with have gone through a variety of different experiences, they all have promised to develop into healthy adults. And it's through our partnerships, through working with them, and through connections that we're able to propel them into the future. If kids mess up, that's part of treatment. That's why they're with us. And so, again, I'm going to talk a little bit about the juvenile justice system, kind of where we are and how we move forward from here. So before we dive in, I want to talk a little bit about the Office of Juvenile Affairs. Just so if you're working in a residential care treatment facility, a Level E program within the Office of Juvenile Affairs, you don't feel like you're on an island. We're really a large state system. We serve every county in Oklahoma, so 77 counties across Oklahoma. We have our Juvenile Services Division, which are our caseworkers within the Office of Juvenile Affairs. And within 39 different counties, or 39 different locations, we have what are known as youth service organizations. These youth service organizations serve as the foundation of the Juvenile Justice Department. These are the organizations that serve alongside our community-based mental health centers to try and treat our kids at the local level, to try and keep kids at home in the community and serving kids at the lowest level of care possible. These agencies also serve if kids are placed in our higher levels of care, whether it be Level E or our medium secure care treatment settings. And so even though kids may come to us and we are treating them on a daily basis within our residential care facilities, there are many supports outside of your specific program that are designed to help kids. And so I encourage you to work closely with our field workers, our juvenile service unit, as well as work with the state office at the Office of Juvenile Affairs, myself, as well as several other people that are designed to help build the most effective treatment program. And of course, the underpinning of everything that we do should always be looking toward the future. Who is the family that is working or that is raising this young person? What are their supports? How can we help build them and give them those supports as we continue? And so I know sometimes when kids come to residential care facilities, it's easy to forget about the communities that they come from. It's easy to lose contact with their core support system, whether those be individuals at the youth service center, their school, their church, other members of the community. We should always be thinking about and connecting kids to those specific community-based individuals. And so why do I focus so much on the future and the promise of kids? I'm really going to dig into this question as we go throughout the training, but I think it's important to realize the history of the juvenile justice system across our country. A brief history, the Juvenile Justice Department was actually founded in 1899 in Chicago. And the sole purpose of the juvenile justice system being developed was that we knew that kids were different than adults. We knew that kids were at a pivotal point in their life and they needed individual support systems and rehabilitative plans to stay on track. We knew that adolescents were not fixed just because they may have done something horribly wrong or even a little wrong. We knew that we could best serve them through rehabilitation, through individual case management, and planning with them. And many of you are familiar with this pendulum that swings in juvenile justice. This pendulum that talks about, at certain points in our history, we have been punishment driven, and at other points in our history, we have been treatment or rehabilitative driven. This pendulum, unfortunately, is a false pendulum because the science over the last 30 to 40 years looking at what works for juvenile justice, we have two different goals. Our goal is to promote community well-being and safety and to ensure the reduction of future crime. What we know works for kids is meeting them where they are, giving them plans and opportunities, and setting them up for success through treatment. We know that punishment has negative impacts on our kids. The further kids enter juvenile justice systems, the further they'll penetrate and likely penetrate the Department of Corrections as adults. And so it is always our approach to meet kids where they are, serve them with the least restrictive placement as possible, and to make sure that we're meeting the rehabilitative needs of that specific individual, which will also help promote community safety. In our Level E, our residential programs, and our medium secure care centers, as well as our detention centers, they are all part of our system. And so I shared a little bit about the bedrock of our 39 youth service agencies. I also think it's important to know other parts of our system. And so right now, the Office of Juvenile Affairs, and this fluctuates depending on the need and the time that kids join our system. But we have about a dozen Level E community residential treatment programs for kids that may need to go to an out-of-home placement. These out-of-home placements tend to be after kids have committed a serious or a violent offense. And for whatever reason, the family situation or the community situation is not deemed appropriate or safe for individuals to continue to live in their home setting, but instead that rehabilitative plan requires an out-of-home treatment setting, like a Level E residential treatment facility. We also operate two currently medium secure care facilities, one in Tecumseh, Oklahoma, and one in Manitou, Oklahoma. In the future, as early as December 2020, we are shifting to one medium secure care facility that will be located in Tecumseh, Oklahoma, that will have the ability to house up to 144 individuals. And so just like your residential treatment center, almost all of the residential treatment centers have the capacity to serve 16 kids at a time throughout that program. Our medium secure care centers also operate individual cottages where, again, we will have no more than 16 kids within a cottage being served through individual treatment plans. However, those medium secure care centers, again, are more restrictive because, again, they were deemed that they could not be maintained either in the community at a Level E facility, and they needed to be at a more secure environment with higher level staffing and more treatment professionals to best meet their needs. And so I'll come back to this pendulum, but I think this picture says 1,000 words, is if you are a parent, how do you want your child to be treated? Do you want them to be treated with respect, taking into account developmental age, maturity, again, thinking about the promise that they can give in the future? Or because a child has made a very bad decision, made a very poor choice, do we want to set them on a path where they don't have a future, where that future is dark? And when we ask ourselves that question, the answer is rather clear. We come to work because we believe that we are making a difference in kids' lives. We believe that kids have the potential to achieve so much more than they have in the past. We believe that children can overcome poor decisions. We also believe that justice is important. And so when we're serving kids that enter the juvenile justice system, we're not just serving that particular child, but we're really serving the family, and our goal is serving the community to ensure that restitution, making sure that kids that have made poor choices are paying back to their community, are contributing to society, making sure that we are respecting the autonomy and desires both of kids that come into the juvenile justice system, but also the victims that have been impacted by, again, these poor choices. And so, again, no case is easy in our system. No case that comes before the Office of Juvenile Affairs or Child Welfare has a simple solution. There are always multiple things that we need to be thinking about. And as I continue to talk through what kids may have gone through, what family situations they've experienced, it is there where we start to look at how do we build these individual rehabilitation plans. And so children are continuing to grow. They're not fixed. And while many of our kids are 16, 17, 18, and even 19 years old, may look like grown adults, the physiological nature of their bodies, their brains, their emotional, social, behavioral development is not fully developed. We'll talk through the latest research, but it really shows that full maturity does not occur up until the mid-20s. And so, do we want to punish crime and have very restrictive responses, or should we give kids opportunities to continue to grow, to develop, to learn, and to be in safe, supportive environments? And that is our goal as an agency, is what is the right level of care that provides that care, support, and safety that all children need, because that's how children thrive. And so when we look at the juvenile justice system, and we look at how our treatment centers interact with youth, we always come back to this one question of, we don't want to do harm to any child that we serve, that any child that comes before us. And so when we think about our responses to kids that, again, have made bad choices, that have made bad decisions, and we have to come up with a solution for them that we hope is going to get them back on track, we always have to weigh the alternatives. When kids are at our residential treatment centers and they have incidents where they are cussing at staff, they may become assaultive, they may go absent without permission. It is our system that has to ask ourselves, not what did the kid do, but what factors led that child to engage in those behaviors? What in the future can we do to fill those needs, to be supportive of those kids, that is going to limit the likelihood that they will make future poor decisions? Those are the types of questions that are going to move our field forward and ensure that we are not doing any potential harm to them. Many people will say, well, this kid did something horrific. Why don't we just send them away? Why don't we just send them out of our community? And it's like if you have a child, they're your child. You're not going to say, you had a bad day, things are over. We're going to say, how can I help you? What are the things that are going on in your life that are causing you to make these poor decisions? You'll learn that very few of the youth that we serve in juvenile justice, a fraction of the kids, a very small percentage, go on to become this life course persistent adult that continues to engage in violent and chronic crime. The vast majority of our kids are on a positive trajectory, and that is why we need to serve them through these individual treatment needs to ensure that they're getting their future needs met. And so at the end of the day, how can we get there together? This is a team effort. I appreciate our residential care partners, our contractors throughout the state, our secure care centers, our field staff, and the judges, attorneys, and everybody in the courtroom. And needless to say, I appreciate the families that have to enter our system. It is hard for me to think about working with kids without thinking about how is your parent doing right now after you made this poor choice? Are they embarrassed? Are they ashamed? Are they just plain old angry? And they could be angry, they could be ashamed, not only at their own particular child, but also at our system as a whole. How did they get treated in the courtroom? How did they get treated when they arrived at the residential treatment care facility? Did we call the family and say, we're really excited to work with your son or daughter? We're really excited that we have programs that are in place to really make sure that these things don't happen again when they come home. We really have a program where we can keep your kids safe at home. We look forward to working with you to set up these safety plans, and we know it's invasive, but our goal is to make sure that we're partnering together, that we're working with you. And again, that we're not doing any harm. And many times, it's just easy to get caught up in the day and to forget about making sure that we're making those connections for families as well as for the kids that we serve. And so the teenage brain is a marvelous feature of development. If you're like me, you likely have done things in the past that, had you gotten caught, you would have likely been faced with law enforcement. Had you gotten caught, you likely may have faced consequences at school or at home or in your community. And so I think it's easy for us to sometimes just kind of pass the blame of, that's a bad kid. When in all reality, it is very easy for us to have become that child that we're talking about. One time where you go to a party and you get into a car with some people, and all of a sudden that car drives up and you didn't know that somebody had a gun, and all of a sudden they fired it out the window at other people. You go to a party, you get intoxicated, you take a substance that you did not know that was laced with something more powerful, and all of a sudden you go and you rob a pharmacy. There are many times where youth get caught up with the wrong crowds, the wrong situations, and engage in illegal behavior. It is in these times where they need support, they need guidance. But it is not to say that youth were born to engage in illegal behavior. Youth were not born to engage in illegal behavior. It was something in their environment, something that led up to that. And some of that is just plain old adolescent development. And so we're going to spend a lot of time kind of talking about the brain, the development of youth, and again, why kids commit these behaviors, why kids enter our system in the first place, and what we can do, not only as a residential treatment program, but as a society, to make sure that we are giving them every opportunity to succeed in the future. The good news is that crime is going down. No one can deny that kids are going to grow up and that teenagers today are going to become the super predators that were cited in the 1990s. Statutes in the juvenile justice system that were put together in the 1980s and the 1990s were working under false beliefs and false assumptions that kids were getting worse and going to become super predators. And when we did that, we created a system that was highly punitive. We locked up kids that committed misdemeanors because we thought that all of a sudden that initial crime was going to result in more. And when we did that, what we found is that a large percentage of those kids got worse and entered the Department of Corrections. And as we learned throughout, again, the last 3 to 4 decades, as we've learned, it is responding to kids, giving them praise and opportunities, and meeting them where they are with an individualized treatment plan that reduces crime. And so what you can see on this graph here is that over the last 20 years, so on the far left-hand side of your screen, in the year 2000, and really this has been shrinking since the late 1990s, is that we have decreased our system about 50%. And at the same time, Oklahoma's population of youth continue to increase. And so, again, this is great for our system. We know that kids are not committing nearly as many crimes as they have in the past. There are fewer referrals, fewer adjudications, and fewer system responses that are impacting the juvenile justice system. But at the same time, this also has outcomes for us that we need to consider. We need to think about what has our school system done? What has our society done? What is universal pre-K in Oklahoma? What are those long-term outcomes on our society that have shown positive benefits for kids? Because nobody has a kid saying, you know what, I hope one day they enter the juvenile justice system. We all have hopes and dreams for our young people. We all have hopes and dreams for our families that have grown up in rough environments. But at the same time, those rough environments have consequences, and it's up to us as individuals to, again, try to meet families where they are in their individual needs. And so I want to highlight this statistic because I think it is really paramount to think about change in our state, in our society, and in our juvenile justice system. Change is possible, and I'm going to talk about why change is hard later, but during the COVID-19 pandemic, during the early part of 2020, our system did things differently because we had pressure. We felt for kids' safety, we needed to ensure that we were not placing kids out of the home unless they absolutely needed to be, that we were not detaining kids in detention unless we felt that it was absolutely necessary. And so when we talk about detention centers, which I didn't talk about that part of our system, again, we have over a dozen detention centers across our state. What we saw as a country, and the Annie E. Casey Foundation, Family Foundation, put this together, but young people admitted to detention fell 52% in March and April. 52%. We decreased our secure care population, our kids with the highest level offenses, with the highest need. We decreased our secure care population during the COVID pandemic within 2 months by 20%. What does this tell me? This tells me that we can do things differently if we try to individualize, if we really look at what are those individual treatment plans for kids. So the second part of this sentence, I think, is just a killer. A decline in 2 months that was equal to the last 13 years within juvenile justice. 13 years that it took to decrease detention rates, because it is hard to change people's hearts and minds about kids. It is easy to say a kid made a bad decision and I'm going to lay down the hammer. That is the easy response to crime. The hard response is what we do day in and day out within the juvenile justice system in our programs. It is fighting for kids to say, what are their individual needs? What are their true risks? And will we have times where we make the wrong decision? Absolutely. But thinking about how many times we make the right decision for kids, going back to that principle of do no harm, how many times do we make the right decision for kids that turns out well, is always going to outweigh those times where kids don't work within our programs and can't be successful. And so it's easy for us as humans, it's our natural instinct to look at the negative, to remember the negative incidents that happen, and for us to make a decision, and all of a sudden a kid that we allowed to go home from detention commits another crime. And it's easy to revert back to our human natural instincts to say, see, I told you, if we do this, the community's not going to be safe. But it's really our emotional sense that is driving policy, and it is not the factual outcomes of the research that's been done over the last 30 to 40 years. The research shows that treating kids at home, keeping kids in the community, is always going to have a better impact. In fact, many states that have developed statewide system reforms around evidence-based practices have shown that we've been able to reduce, not we as in Oklahoma, but we as a country, have been able to reduce out-of-home placements by 30 to 50%. That 30 to 50% number matches the same statistic around detention, meaning that we can do things differently. But change is hard. It is possible, but it takes repeated, effortful, innovative movements to move the juvenile justice system further than we are today. And it's because of that that I'm excited to be giving you this presentation today, because you are the kind of partner that I think has the promise to shape our future for kids. You are the future when we talk about changes in the Department of Corrections that is going to reduce those numbers, to reduce incarcerations, to reduce teenage pregnancy, to reduce juvenile and adult crime. You are the future that is going to reduce child maltreatment cases in Oklahoma. And so that leads us to the question is, who are these kids? How do they enter our system that we work in? No kid has the same story, but if you've been in our system for even a month or two, you're going to start to see patterns of where these kids come from, what their backgrounds include, how treating them with respect and kindness is something that they're not familiar with. And so when we think about Oklahoma, when we think about our state, I'm going to talk a little bit about adverse childhood experiences in a minute. But in 2015, what we found is that 60% of kids in 2015 that touched juvenile justice had been previously identified within our Department of Human Services, our child welfare organization in the state of Oklahoma. 60%. In 2019, the same statistics were run. Our percentage of kids within juvenile justice that were previously identified by child welfare at some point in their childhood, 80% of them had been touched. This means that our state has enormous opportunities to impact and prevent juvenile justice involvement. It takes concerted effort, attention, support, and services to potentially get our juvenile justice numbers down when it comes to kids that have touched our child welfare numbers. Kids don't grow up to be criminals. Kids grow up in environments where they are driven to engage in poor choices because they don't have the supports that they need. These environments that they grow up in, these poor choices that they make, are not because of the inner individual as a person. It is not because they are a bad kid. They are good kids that made bad decisions. 70% of the kids that we serve in juvenile justice have an identifiable mental health condition. This 70% number that I reference has to do with all kids juvenile justice serves, not the 200-ish kids that we place out of the home in our Level E facilities, not the 100 kids that we place in our medium secure care facilities. If 70% of our kids that have touched juvenile justice have a mental health condition, imagine the kids that we're placing out of the home. What do those numbers look like? It is almost every single child that is placed out of the home has an identifiable mental health condition that needs individualized, tailored treatment, tailored responses to fix and help and assist in decreasing the mental health concerns that our kids face. Mental health is not a life sentence, just like juvenile justice and acts that kids commit. It is not a life sentence. There are treatments out there that are effective for depression, for substance use, for post-traumatic stress disorder, for generalized anxiety, for complex trauma, for conduct disorder. A lot of people say, well, you can't fix conduct disorder. These kids that are growing up delinquent. There are treatments that work for conduct disorder, both in home, without kids leaving, as well as in residential treatment facilities. There are treatments out there for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. And so when I talk about treatment and I talk about mental health, it's easy to say, well, I'm going to jump to a pill for that. It's a lot cheaper to go see a medical doctor. Oftentimes in Oklahoma, a medical doctor that doesn't have specialization in child and adolescent psychiatry or developmental behavioral pediatrics. It's easy to jump to a primary care physician and for individuals to be given medications to try and mask or treat mental health conditions. But the overwhelming support for treatment of mental health conditions is behavioral intervention, cognitive behavioral intervention, getting kids to slow down, to think about things differently, and to understand how the environment impacts how they think and how they feel, and again, the behavior that they engage in. But it's not easy. It takes sustained effort to support kids. And as I talk through this, I'm going to get to some parts that talk about, it's easy to support young kids under the age of 6, where they kind of look at you and they're kind of sad and desperate for help. Kids that are 13, 14, 15, 18 years old, they may no longer look desperate for help on the outside. They may look like grown adults. They may look scary. But in fact, the vast majority of kids are still kids, and they're desperate for our help. They're desperate for our support. And it's how we approach them that allows us to break through that exterior and really connect and really have impact on kids' lives. So my sister posted this photo the other day on social media, and it had kind of impacts around kind of thinking about social justice and some of the latest incidents of civil unrest that have occurred throughout our country. And it is very real that our system is flawed. It is very real that our society is set up in a way that leads to racial and ethnic disparities across our system. That we have more youth of color or minority status that enter both child welfare and juvenile justice in Oklahoma than we do the majority population of white Caucasians. And I think it's really unfortunate for us to think about the racial and ethnic disparities. It's not a simple solution of why, but there are many situations that lead up to the fact that these kids come before our attention. It includes things like growing up in high crime areas of our communities. It is true that many kids grow up in areas where drug use is higher than other parts of the town. A study was done on adverse childhood experiences, which I'll hit on in a minute. But kids that grew up on one side of the river versus the other had a 10-year life expectancy difference in Tulsa because of the early life experiences that kids go through. So when you look at kids, it's easy to think about, man, the future's bright. Look at them. They're playing. They're having fun. They haven't experienced bad things that maybe they'll go through as they age. And that doesn't mean that crime doesn't exist in high affluent communities. In fact, crime exists everywhere for teens because it's teens that repeatedly make poor decisions. It's teens that make bad decisions because they're not mature enough to make smart ones. They don't think about the consequences. So crime exists everywhere, but it's how our system responds. Do we respond in a fair and consistent manner? What is it that maybe some kids get but others don't because of the color of their skin, the amount of money that their family has, or even the county that they live in? I mean, that's the unfortunate reality, is that as much as we want that system to be fair and balanced on that pendulum that we talk about, it can vary tremendously based on who the judge is, who the attorney is, who the caseworker is for that individual child. And so it's our job every day to think about what is best for kids, regardless of the limitations that we have. What is going to be best for kids? And so Governor Stitt and First Lady Sarah Stitt has taken on the challenge to improve the mental health outcomes for families across Oklahoma. She has developed platforms of community rallying to make sure that we're serving kids and thinking about what do families need. There are things like the Front Porch Initiative or Be a neighbor. You can volunteer, you can serve. It's our goal that we know what families need in our communities. We know that we can help support them. And we need to have places where families can show up and not feel ashamed or embarrassed to be there, but be hopeful and be happy and know that they can get the supports that they need. If they're having troubles, we need facilities across our state. We need agencies, we need services, we need neighbors that are stepping up to support families. When you look at the graph on the left hand of your slide that shows the United States, and you look at the lighter states, the lighter blue color versus the darker blue, that signifies the amount of adverse childhood experiences that children have experienced in the variety of state. The lighter the color, the less adverse childhood experiences. The greater the color, or the darker the color, the more adverse childhood experiences have been experienced by children and adults. If you look at Oklahoma, we are last in the country for adverse childhood experiences. Last. No state has children that experience more adverse trauma, maltreatment, parental separation, alienation than Oklahoma. So what are these adverse childhood experiences that have been measured, studied repeatedly, and why do they matter when it comes to juvenile justice? So adverse childhood experiences could be anything from verbal, sexual, physical abuse, could be having a parent incarcerated, experiencing or witnessing domestic violence, experiencing mental illness. All of these things add up. And while they may not look like they have a lifelong impact for kids, all of the research that has been done shows that if you have 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, your odds of having early fatality due to medical conditions is significantly greater. That study that I cited in Tulsa, where people lived on average 10 years less because they grew up across the river in a low poverty area, has to do directly with adverse childhood experiences. A decade of life because of early life problems that lead to long-term health impacts. Things like bullying, poverty, peer rejection, community violence, food scarcity. These are realities for many Oklahomans, many children. And children in juvenile justice are even more at risk of experiencing these things. We talk a lot about detention, and we talk a lot about anytime we place a young person outside of the home, even if it is in a shelter or an alternative placement. It's parental separation, and it's causing additional adverse childhood experiences that can lead to these horrible outcomes that we are trying to avoid. And we can avoid them. We know. I shared a video recently about a town in Pennsylvania that was in the early, I'm going to mess up the year if I even try to tell you, but there's a town in Pennsylvania where this was before kind of a great melting pot, or it was a melting pot of the United States, but it was a Irish community, I believe, and what they found is that community connections, relationships, employment, getting kids educated in school, the ability to read, to have a mentor. Kids are not destined to die early from adverse childhood experiences. Our system, through building relationships, connections, equal education, equal opportunity, all of these things are the answers to adverse childhood experiences. It is up to each one of us in the room to think about, how do we play a part in shaping our future? And in juvenile justice, it takes a village. Our kids don't come to us because they had it easy, especially when we're talking about kids that require out-of-home care. When we look at our system as a whole, so again, this is every kid that comes to the attention of juvenile justice, we find that nearly 70% of them grow up in a single family household. Think about how you grew up. What were some of the things that you learned, that you experienced, that you had to overcome? Many of you may have come from a single parent household and done well. Many of you may have come from a single family household and realized the struggle that it took you to work through different phases of your life. I really like this quote that's on the screen where, you can raise good children in single parent households. Many of you may have come from that environment. It is possible, and many do it, but they do it in heroic situations. It's much more difficult. The numbers move against us in a broad society, meaning that there's so many more things that kids have to overcome if they come from these types of environments. It doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that sometimes they're a lot harder, and oftentimes they're a lot harder. The statistics continue to get worse when we talk about how do we support kids, what things do we need for kids. When about 11.5% of our kids that come to our attention live with both parents, but more, 15%, live with grandparents or other relatives. What has gone on in a child's life to have them be raised by a grandparent or a relative? Is it parental incarceration? Is it drug abuse? Is it child maltreatment? The opioid pandemic, as well as other substance use disorders in our state, have a huge impact, not only on those that are using the substances, but on the future of our children that we serve. And so there are many factors that go into youth committing illegal behavior. We always think about, well, how did you get here? Why did you get here? And sometimes we jump to the conclusion of, they were just born that way. They were destined for crime. And the reality is that that's just not accurate. Again, fractions of a percentage point of kids are destined for this life course persistent track in the adult correction system. The overwhelming majority of kids that engage in juvenile crime, even ones that are serious and violent, have a brighter future. But they got there for a reason. They got there because maybe they didn't have the basic resources. They didn't have the food on their table. They didn't have a bed to lay their head down at night. They may not have been able to go to the doctor, or maybe they went to a doctor and they got hooked on a pill because, again, it was just the easy solution at the time, but we weren't thinking through things. They didn't have the support, the resources. When you were a teenager, you wanted to have the best looking shoes. You wanted to have the best looking clothes. You wanted to stand out in a way. Sometimes you wanted to be a rebel. We'll talk about kind of general adolescence later on. But we also talk about development and skills. What skills do kids have that end up in our system? Oftentimes they're lacking things like social skills. They didn't have the money to participate in team sports and develop team working relationships. They need a lot of practice in these areas. 1 in 6 kids in the U.S. is born with some kind of developmental disability. You pair developmental disability, poverty, prenatal exposure to drug or alcohol substances, all of those things make juvenile crime or aggressive behavior much more likely. And again, it's really unfortunate that we know that depending on where the community where you live, the policing practices, whether you have employment opportunities or a family has employment opportunities, all of those things impact which kids go on to either engage in illegal behavior or face more severe consequences because of the legal behavior that they engage in. In the last column, which I can't hit on enough, is that the vast majority of kids that come into our system are adolescents who are growing, who are learning, who are developing, but at the same time, many of them are raised, quote unquote, what used to be known as kind of the latchkey children. Single parent household, lack of supervision. They want to be a rebel and kind of do the new thing. You know, when you're 15, you want to be 19. You want to do things that you think adults do, even if you're not sure. You want to experiment as a teenager. I mean, it's part of it. Again, we all did things as teenagers that, looking back, we would say, oh my gosh, how am I still alive? Why did I make that choice? And again, confusion that goes through emotional development, whether it be puberty, relationships, or stressors around social dynamics. Again, where at the same time, kids want to fit in, they want to stand out, but who do they want to stand out to? They want to stand out to their peers or people they look up to. Many teens are no longer looking up to mom or dad or kind of positive influence uncle. Many teens are looking up to potentially kids in the wrong peer group or young adults that, again, are not making good decisions because they feel like there's an opportunity there because they're not able to see the whole picture yet. The brain is not working in that respect. And so I'm going to show a video that is done by Oprah Winfrey, and it just talks about how early life impacts experience a number of traumas and how those traumas can impact not only children, but also impact those children as they grow into adults. So bear with me for 1 minute as we get this set up.
A Correspondent Candid with Oprah Winfrey.
Oprah, your story for 60 Minutes this week is about childhood trauma. And there's a lot of new science here about trauma-informed care. For anyone who's dealing with a traumatized child, what can they learn from your story?
Well, I think that this story is it is my hope that our story on trauma-informed care will not just be impactful, but will also be revolutionary. It certainly has caused a revolution in my own life. And I was struck by the story because it reminded me of my own childhood growing up in Milwaukee. It's not lost on me, the irony of being back in the same city, Milwaukee, where I grew up on welfare, poor, a lot of negative experiences, sexual abuse and all of that. What's the difference between a really bad childhood and being able to overcome that and a traumatic childhood and someone not being able to overcome that?
Really, it boils down to something pretty simple.
And the answer that Dr. Bruce Perry gives you is relationships.
If you also have opportunities to be connected to people in positive ways, that can buffer some of those effects. And as you get older...
I'd like to know more about that.
What he really means is love. He's a scientist, he's not going to use the word love, but it really is about how you are responded to, valued, trusted, and loved by those around you. So I didn't get it from the people who I felt I should have gotten it from. It can be anybody who cares enough about you to ask the question, what happened to you?
Could you trace back in your mind, it was that person who made the difference?
I know exactly who did it. I know exactly the moment I started to feel valued, and for me, it was school.
I wanted to be a fourth grade teacher because of Mrs. Duncan. And I haven't seen Mrs. Duncan since then, and Mrs. Duncan is here today. Mrs. Duncan!
The moment I felt the most value was in my fourth grade class when Mrs. Duncan said to me, I was the one who was chosen to lead the class and whatever it was.
So what was I like? I don't really remember. I do remember you.
I remember you were such a fluent reader.
Well,
if I had a class full of students like Oprah, I would have been floating on air.
Mrs. Duncan instilled in me this sense of believing that I mattered. And that is what every human being is looking for.
when you first heard that I had done something in life, did you know that it was me?
Yes, I kept up with you without your being aware of it.
And it was Mrs. Duncan who helped heal you?
For me, yes. It was Mrs. Duncan, and then it was my sixth grade teacher, Mr. Graham. It was school that made me feel a sense of value and connection.
You learned a lot on this story.
Oh, I learned a lot on this story. This story was life-changing for me.
Life-changing, really.
Life-changing. And people use that word rhetorically. Life-changing. It's changed the way I operate in my business, with my people, with my school. 1, 2, 3. You say that the most important question to ask of people who have gone through trauma is not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you.
Yeah.
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 So when you see, a church being shot up, or you see, all of the headline-making stories of people seemingly gone mad, your first thought is, what happened to that person?
Right.
Right. What has been life-changing for me is the question, what happened to you? Not what is wrong with you, but what happened to you? Which is an important question, not just for people who have been so-called traumatized, but it's the most important question you can ask of anyone. I can say that of all the stories I've ever done in my life and all of the experiences I've ever had and people I've interviewed, this story has had more impact on me than practically anything I've ever done.
It's changed the way you see everyone?
It's changed the way I see everyone. So when I have an employee who is acting out of line or who is just being a jerk, I don't think, what's wrong with that guy? What's wrong with that girl? What's wrong with that person? I think, I wonder what happened to them. I wonder what happened to them. I wonder what happened that caused them to behave that way. That's what this story did for me.
So think about it. Will you be that person that Oprah talks about? Will you be that mentor, that support person that the child needs, that will, instead of saying, what's wrong with you, it's really about what happened to you. And think about, again, it's not a question of, what, but it's why. How did you get here? How can I help you? What do you need now? I realize that your past is your past. It's all about what can we do now. Dealing with those large emotions. Kids have gone through a lot before they come to us in the juvenile justice system. Not only as children, but the system itself. Think about it. How long did kids stay in detention? Were they charged as a youthful offender or as a juvenile delinquent? Thinking about what that means to the child. How did they receive that stay in detention? They're probably afraid, fearful. They don't know what's going to happen. When they come to us, if you're afraid, you're fearful, you don't know what's going to happen, you're going to be on edge. Your body's going to be tight. You're not going to be sleeping well. You're not going to be feeling well. It's all about how do we develop those relationships? How do we develop those connections to best serve kids? And so early development matters. The life course that children are on doesn't start when they walk into our door. It starts it starts before they're born. Those first few years of life are crucial. But it doesn't mean just because now they're 14, 15, or 16 that their life is over because they made a bad choice. That is why we have a job. That is why we are in this business, is because we know that we can influence the environment today and in the future to allow kids to get back on a positive track to development. There was a really neat study that was cited in this book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. It's a pretty famous book, and so many of you have likely seen it at the store, maybe picked it up. But it talked about professional athletes, and then it also kind of tied into kind of academic success. And what they found is that when they looked at professional athletes within a certain sport, the kids that were born in the fall of a year, so September through December, almost all of the professional athletes within this country had birthdays. I believe it was Canada, I believe it was hockey, just in case people are curious. But almost all the professional athletes came out of this country, or this province, were born between September and December of whatever their birth year was. When they looked at students within that same province, what they found is that kids that were born September to December had better outcomes than kids that were born outside of that. And so why does this matter? It matters because kids that are born in the fall are older, they're more mature, they could be significantly taller than their counterparts. I mean, we're talking a couple inches when you're 5 and 6. We're talking ability to sit down at a table for 5 minutes versus 2, the ability to focus and to concentrate. And so these older kids were doing better, and then adults recognized it. Adults would say, you know, I really love that you're sitting. Wow, you're so smart. Wow, you're so talented. Man, you can really shoot that puck into the net. But the kids that were younger, the kids that were smaller, the kids that were less mature, they didn't develop into the professional athlete. They didn't develop into the academic scholar because the teachers didn't see them as being as smart because they were younger, they were less mature. They didn't have the skill set. They didn't come over and say, you know, I really love that you're trying, you're doing so good. And so the plot of this story really shifts because what they found is that they started kids later on in a different birth cohort and allowed them to grow up, to be more mature, to be taller, to be ready. And those kids in that cohort were just as likely to become professional athletes than the kids born in the fall. And so we can't recreate our schooling system, we can't recreate our kind of sports dynamic, but what we can recreate is the praise and opportunity for students, athletes, and for kids that aren't doing as well, to let them know it's not about them, it's about how I respond to them. And so thinking about kids in the juvenile justice system, they didn't have these opportunities to grow, to learn, and to thrive. They were the shorter kids. They were the kids that were coming to class without clean clothes on. They were the kids that struggled with learning disabilities or had ADHD. They didn't get the praise of, you know what, you're doing so good, you're so smart, I can't wait to see what you're going to do in the future. They were the kids that didn't get that attention. And so when they come to us in the juvenile justice system, we need to give them more attention in a positive manner to best shape their outcomes. And so when we were kids, you know, or at least when I was a kid, I would dream and think and kind of fantasize about, you know, what my future would be like. And many of us had dreams. We wanted to become doctors, lawyers, professional athletes, musicians, whatever your dreams were as a kid. Eventually you got to a point where you started to close those doors, where you started to turn off the stars or the lights. And eventually we settled on a career that we thought was attainable, that gave us kind of the life that we thought was significant. Many of you in our secure care, medium secure care detention centers are likely probably still trying to figure this out. You're just saying, I want to make a difference. You're still looking to open doors. But for kids that come into the juvenile justice system, if they've committed a serious or violent offense, what happens to that kid's dream about who they want to become? Are we turning off the lights? Are we closing the door? Or again, are we receiving them? And instead of turning off the lights, closing the door, we're going to open 20 other doors, because that's how kids are going to thrive. They're going to thrive because we give them opportunities that they've never experienced before. And that's up to each one of us, again, to give kids these opportunities where, again, it's not about punishment. It's not about what you did in the past. It's what can you do in the future that's going to make you the person that you want to become. And so a number of Supreme Court rulings has found the same thing that we're talking about. It's found that adolescents are not adults, that adolescents cannot be treated the same as adults, that adolescents don't respond to things that we do as adults. And in fact, our adult system is already broken, and so the things that we're doing for adults probably also don't work. I mean, that's why Governor Stitt this last year basically released over 400 prisoners because we were locking them up, and what we found is that makes it worse for our society as well as that population to be successful. And so just to review these really briefly, there were 3 different cases just to highlight. One was basically in 2005. So think about it, it's 2020. The juvenile justice system was made in 1899. It took up to 2005 for the death penalty to be ruled unconstitutional for those under the age of 18. 2010 said, if a kid does something and they're 17, you cannot give them a life without parole sentence. 2010. 2012, it's increasingly clear that adolescent brains are not yet fully mature in regions and systems related to higher order executive functioning, such as impulse control, planning ahead, and risk avoidance. I would read that again, but I think you can read it for yourself. But it's increasingly clear that kids are growing, that kids are learning, and that kids are developing, and it's up to us to help their brains form so they can engage in more healthy behaviors in the future. And so brain development, many of you have likely seen this brain scan in a variety of presentations, but what you're going to find is that the darker blue regions of the brain have gray matter, meaning that basically your brain has been fully developed, it's formed, it's fit, and it's not going to grow anymore. That dark blue in brains typically doesn't develop until the early 20s, but again, the latest research is finding that full brain development, full maturity doesn't occur until the mid-20s. When you look at younger kids, you're going to see bright yellow, red, kind of greenish colors. These are the regions of the brain that are not filled in yet, that have not made those connections, that are still working on building, growing, developing these neural networks. And when we talk about the brain and we talk about different parts of the brain, what we're going to find is that those yellow, green, red areas just so happen to be the parts of the brain that allow us to control impulses, to slow down and think, to make better choices. What we're also going to find is that the areas of the brain that need to be developed as we turn into adults, the more trauma we experience, the less those regions of the brain are developed. Meaning that trauma is going to make your brain engage. It's not going to make you engage in these behaviors, but you're going to be more likely to be impulsive. You're going to be more likely to engage in poor choices because your brain's not developed, because you don't have the ability. And so I say ability to slow down and think. It is not a conscious decision, even though oftentimes we say kids consciously did this. They chose to do this. And if we slow them down and we ask them, they're going to say, yes, I chose to do this. But oftentimes we don't ask ourselves, did they have the ability to do anything differently? And I think that's a really important question when we approach kids. And so there's a substance that's part of kind of the nerve system in our brain. And here recently it's received much more attention because many people were concerned about dementia and Alzheimer's and some of these other kind of medical findings. But this process called myelination, and the importance for growth and development. When kids' brains go through that development and they're getting darker blue, meaning that their neural networks are filled in, it means that a process of myelination is occurring across our brain system. Meaning that if kids practice things, those synapses, those nerves are going to get stronger. And so if we want kids to make good choices, if we want kids to engage in healthy behaviors, if we want kids to be productive, we have to give them opportunities, repeat opportunities, to practice those behaviors, to form those neural networks. If we have a system that is set up where a kid engages in a misbehavior, does something serious or violent or wrong, and we put them in detention for a period of days, months, and sometimes many months, how often do they get to practice the productive behaviors that we want them to experience, that we want them to form in their brains? They don't get that practice. And so whether it be our residential care facilities, our medium secure care facilities, and preferably our home communities where kids are practicing day in, day out in the environments that they live, those are the opportunities for practice and treatment that is really going to change the future and again increase the important development of the brain. But the brain is not that simple. It takes many years for it to develop. And so I want to show another video that demonstrates rich environments that allow children to learn and to grow. And then I'm going to draw some parallels, even though these are young kids and we're talking about juvenile justice, they're just as important in infants as they are in teenagers. So please pause as we watch this video.
We need to work on that, right? Yes, okay. Did you understand it though? No. Okay. All right. Huh? Oh, not this one. This is the grand finale of it. Yeah, that's the last one. That's what I was wondering. I don't know what they're gonna do next season because they did some stuff this time. Exactly what I was thinking. Oh yeah. Right, don't bring that in. You know what I'm saying? Don't do the same stuff. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I was thinking that. Yeah. Like go somewhere else with that, but don't break here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. That's what I said. Then it was like, you know what I'm saying? And I was like, what in the world? But don't do that here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Really? I thought the same thing. We think a lot alike, huh? Oh, that's crazy. Right.
So thinking about that video, I really love it. I hope it brought a smile to your eyes just like it did me. Looking at that young father and his baby holding a conversation. Was it meaningful? I don't know. But those were the connections that young child made communicating with their dad. They were able to say, I say something, you say something. In young child education, they call it kind of serve and return. And so these serves and returns are the foundation of building healthy relationships, looking at eye contact, smiling, saying something, being responded to. These are just as important when it comes to the lives of teenagers. Teenagers want to be heard, they want to be seen, they want to be appreciated. They may push back because they're teenagers. They want to be left alone too. But at the same time, they need to feel safe, they need to feel connected. And that's exactly what that young dad did with his baby, is that the baby felt safe, open to share, and they had back and forth. We need to develop the same kinds of interventions when we think about interacting with teenagers. So I have another kid-based video that I want to show. This is a slightly older toddler, and many of us, in fact the other day I bought one of these little pier rods just to kind of have some fun with a friend. And you know, when you're little and you think about fishing, you know, you're just trying your best to get the water in the line, and man, if you catch something, it's like your world and dreams have come true. But at the same time, as a parent, you buy these little rods and you're like, you know, I'm just going to kind of try to teach them how to cast, and maybe they'll catch something, maybe they won't. But the lessons in this video, despite it again being a toddler when we're talking about teenagers, I think are kind of astronomical. And so I'm going to go ahead and pause here, let us watch this video, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Don't hook your head.
Reel it in. He's got one. Reel it in, son.
Reel it in.
Hold your hand by that trigger.
I got it.
Keep reeling it. Keep reeling it. Good boy. Oh my gosh. Look at it jumping. Reel it in.
Keep going.
Back up. Now back up. Walk backwards.
Kason, walk backwards.
Walk over that way, because you got him hung in the bushes. Reel it in.
Really?
Back up.
Help me.
I will if you'll back up. I want you to do it by yourself.
Back up, Kason.
Ooh.
Yay,
Did you video all of
This
it?
is your first catch. You're my first catch. Now it's your turn to get
Hold him now.
a picture of it.
Let go of your rod. Hold him.
Good boy.
Hold him like this.
That's
Hold it-
how a
hold it
man
tight.
holds it. That's
Grab
how
a hold of
man
it tight.
holds it.
Just like that. And look at Mama.
That's how a man holds it.
Look at Mama. Look at Mama.
So thinking about that video, there are so many amazing developmental things that you saw. You saw the young child, what those parents had been trying to teach him. He had said, like he was casting, he was like, don't hit yourself in the head. He's echoing what his parents have told him in the past. You could see that all of a sudden he caught the fish was on the line, and his emotion center of his brain lit up, and he froze. He didn't know what to do. And so as he froze and he didn't know what to do, his parents didn't come in and grab the pole. His parents slowly said, okay, you got him. Start reeling him in. Go ahead and pull. His dad came over, was standing kind of right next to him, kept giving him instructions. And again, you could see the kid, his excitement saying, you know, I got one, I got one. And so as the dad came over, did he help the young person? Did he help his kid? And you would notice that the only time that he helped was right when he needed to get the fish out of the weeds so the kid could pull him in. And at the very end of the video, you can kind of hear the kid doing that self-talk about, you know, what his parents had said and like try to be careful and try to hold it right and all these other things. And so it's this video that I really want to talk about is that emotion center in the brain and what kids need in order to regulate your response. So again, fight, flight, freeze. Again, the kid froze. The dad kind of came in and said, you know, I can support you. You got it. Had all this encouragement. And so thinking about this particular video, it is easy for us to praise, to encourage, to coach, and to be supportive when kids are doing things right. But what happens when kids are 16 and 17 and they're not doing things right? Do we just stop and we don't coach? We don't be supportive? We say, you know, you messed up? Kids aren't going to benefit from saying you did it wrong. They know they did it wrong. That's why they're with us. They know that they're in trouble. They may not want to admit it. They may not look like they care. But it's in those moments that we need to rise above that, to see the situation for what it is, and to help coach them through these hard and difficult emotions that kids experiences. Again, what happens to myelination when kids experience ACEs? What happens when kids grow up in chaotic environments? What happens when kids lack practice? They make bad decisions because they don't know how to do anything else. They don't know how to get themselves out of a hole. It is up to us to come in and show them the path, to help practice with them how to make better decisions and how to cope with the difficult emotions, particularly when kids have done things that have done something that is serious or violent to someone else. These are things that kids need practice with, they need help with, and that is our role as an agency as well as with our contract partners to give kids those opportunities. So I mentioned this earlier, but I just want to highlight another brain scan. You know, normally when you put brain scans into your presentation, you automatically kind of rise your IQ points, at least 10 points, and people are seen as experts. But, and so this slide just really, it shows the images of a brain that grew up in a thriving environment and a brain that grew up in a depleted environment with not a lot of opportunities. Bright spots are good in this photo. unlike the one that we saw before, where, again, dark blue was kind of good. But bright spots in this photo mean more activity, more connections, more kind of progressive environments. Dark spots mean those networks aren't formed. There's not a connection. Those pieces of the brain are not functioning optimally for where we want. And so what you're going to see is that on your right side of the screen where it talks about the temporal lobe, and the kids that have grown up in a depleted environment don't have areas of the brain that are nearly as developed as kids that grew up with different opportunities. And so in our treatment programs, community, level E, or medium secure, we need to give them opportunities so we can continue to have their brain grow and function appropriately. And so I bring this slide up that says, caution, watch your step, because when kids get in trouble, what do? Many kids will fess up and say, yeah, I did it. But many kids won't. Many kids get frozen in their emotions. They don't know how to respond. And so I talk a lot about, what is empathy? What is remorse? What is regret? And I go into courtrooms and people say, well, they don't look remorseful. They don't look like they regret what they did. They may not even say that they regret or that they're remorseful for what they did. Does that mean that the kids are not able to develop? That they're not able to feel those feelings? No, it doesn't mean that. What it means is that many of the kids that we serve, they're not ready yet. They're afraid, they're scared, their brain is already kind of gone haywire, sometimes for years before they came to our attention, where they don't know how to express emotions. They don't know what to look like. They don't know what to say. Many times in our system, the way that it's set up, where kids have their own attorney, if kids did something wrong, what does that attorney tell them to do? Look straight. Don't show emotion. Don't tell anybody what you ever did. Again, you have client attorney confidentiality. And so kids have been sometimes told this for weeks and months at a time. Families may have multiple different responses of they want to protect their kid, but they want to get their kid the right treatment. And so the kid is being bounced back and forth saying, be open, get treatment, but at the same time, don't say anything. And if you don't look remorseful, then you don't feel it. Then you're not guilty enough. We need to make you feel it. But we can't make kids feel and experience things through punishment, because all we're going to do is we're going to turn on these chaotic environments of their emotional center brain that already aren't working appropriately, and we're not going to allow the parts of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, to develop and logically think through and communicate different feelings and experiences. And so as I talk through the brain and more of those impacts, I really just wanted to kind of highlight that a kid looking remorseful or even saying that they're remorseful, to me, is not an indication of their amenability to treatment or even their response to treatment. It's getting the kid in, letting them experience treatment, to go through it on a week-by-week basis and slowly making progress, because you don't build the brain overnight. It takes practice. It takes repeat opportunities. And so, how do we respond when youth get in trouble? Again, are we going to say, to your 1-year-old when they're trying to walk and they fall over? Are you going to say, you didn't walk, you fell down, you're doing it wrong? Or are you going to say, all right, you're almost there, you're going to do it? Can we get to a point in our society where kids do something that is horribly wrong, but say, you know what? I know that you can do better, and I look forward to working with you in that process. It's a drastically different way of thinking about youth justice and how we can best serve youth in treatment. And so I told you that I was going to talk a little bit about two different parts of the brain. You have what is known as your limbic system. This is a part of your brain that some people describe as primitive. This primitive part of your brain, if you make a ball with your fist and you think about your fist being your brain and you think about your arm being the spinal cord, is that your spinal cord goes up into what is known as the brain stem. And this brain stem is the primitive part of the brain that is basically your fight, flight, or freeze response. Some people call it like your animal part of your brain, of something happens to you and you're gonna react. And so this part of your brain, when things happen in your environment, spikes. And this area of your limbic brain spikes. You're not able to use the other parts of your brain in a reasonable manner because you're afraid. You're not sure whether you're safe. And so thinking about our kids and where they come from, they're really good at the limbic system. They're really good at saying, oh man, I need to run away, or oh man, I need to protect myself. But they're not very good at the prefrontal cortex, partly because of their age, their developmental status. And so this prefrontal cortex is where kids really start to learn things about empathy, learn things about insight, to respond flexibly in their environment regardless of what goes on. We want kids to have a burst of the limbic system, but then we want their prefrontal cortex to turn on. And so this prefrontal cortex has the ability to regulate body emotions. And it is these body emotions that impact how we think about things. Are we thinking clearly? Are we confused? Are we afraid? Are we able to use rationalization? Or does the limbic system take over and we're just back into this kind of fight response? And so we really want treatment to help kids regulate and recognize when their body is being emotionally provoked by the limbic system. But treatment happens when we're helping that prefrontal cortex grow that muscle. Just like when you go to the gym. If you go to the gym once, even if you go to the gym once and you do it intensely, like an out-of-home placement, and you're practicing all the time, you can only practice so much before you get fatigued, right? And so it is consistent, repeated practice, enough reps with enough weight at the right time, at the right duration, right course, that's gonna help those brains develop. And so as teens grow, we want them to be more independent. But when teens grow, they make poor decisions because we're not watching them as closely, because their prefrontal cortex is not developed. And it doesn't matter whether we're tough on crime. If we're tough on crime, it's not going to prevent other teens from not engaging in crime. It's a false notion. In fact, the Juvenile Sex Offender Registry has been studied across the U.S., and there's a mass movement to remove the juvenile registry because it doesn't show that it increases community safety. And so it doesn't increase community safety. And then so we were like, well, maybe the Juvenile Sex Offender Registry decreases other kids from engaging in illegal sexual behavior because we think that it's a deterrent. We think that having this in our system, kids are gonna think about it before they engage in the illegal behavior. And what we found is that that's not true at all. What we found is that kids make poor decisions. They do not think about the consequences of their actions before they engage in it. And many won't know how to respond when they are caught, when they get in trouble, and when they enter our system. So it is hard for me to kind of go through this without saying, you know what? We need a system that can help kids after they make poor decisions because they're going to make them regardless. And so we need to help them understand the gravity sometimes of their actions and how it impacted others. But we can't do that in one day. It's going to take a good treatment course in order for kids to learn these elements. And so what is our role as a system? What do we want for kids? Is that kids are already, regardless of whether they're in the juvenile justice system, the school system, or just our kids at home, we know that their brains are still being shaped. And it is our job to help align those features to make them productive citizens as adults that have skill sets and can adequately function within our society, within the rules that are kind of set before us. And so I throw up a couple questions on the slides, around, what part of the brain should be targeted in rehabilitation? Why is it important to be careful with these emotion centers? And so I think we already know the two parts of the brain that I think are most important in treatment based on what we've just talked about. The limbic system, the prefrontal cortex. But it is the issue with the second part that I think we have to be really careful on, is that these kids have grown up in environments that they've been abused, they've been maltreated, they've been in scary situations, they've witnessed violence. If we come and we make kids feel afraid, because that's what we're supposed to do, we're supposed to punish them, we're supposed to scare them out of engaging in future crime, what we're doing is we're making that emotion center of the brain appear like fireworks. And just like I said before, if we're making the emotion center appear like fireworks, we're defeating our purpose because we're not working on the prefrontal cortex of the brain anymore. We're not able to help develop kids, to grow kids into making more healthy and appropriate decisions. There's a mantra at one of our Level E contract partner facilities that I really think is important for us to look at in depth. And so I'm going to go ahead and read this quote, but I think this serves as a grounding post to evaluate our treatments. Do we have it set up with this mentality, with this approach that's best going to serve kids? And so if telling a kid to act different made a difference, it would have already made a difference and he wouldn't be here. If punishing a kid worked to change behavior, it would have already worked and he wouldn't be here. If giving advice to a kid worked to change behavior, it would have already worked and he wouldn't be here. As a result, our treatment approach strives to be different so that we don't demand, punish, or give advice. We encourage, challenge, teach, rehearse, laugh, and strive to accept each kid in a way that he has never experienced before. That is the way that we would want our own kids to be treated. Again, it is easy to yell. It is easy to punish. Parents have been doing it since kids have been born. Teachers in schools have been doing it since kids have gone to school. And so it is our system's responsibility to think about, what do kids really need? Because all the normal stuff didn't work. And so maybe we need to do things differently. Maybe we need to think about and approach situations differently. And so, again, if we're going to make progress in kids' lives, if we're really going to change the future, we have to teach kids to regulate their emotions and to develop new parts of their brain that's going to allow them to think and behave differently. So again, we encourage, challenge, teach, rehearse, laugh, and strive to accept each kid in a way that they've never experienced before. How do you do that? How do you get a program to be that powerful? You get a program to be that powerful because it teaches kids about connections and relationships. There's a reason that the emotion of love is so strong. It's because it's that love that you feel internally. It radiates your body's experience. We want kids to feel that same connection of support in our programs, to know that they're important, that they feel heard and that they're seen, that they're valued, that they have opportunities, and we're excited to see them grow. And so this approach not only teaches growth, but it teaches accountability for actions. It teaches things like maturity, empathy, and it leads to community safety through giving kids opportunities to be successful. And so make no mistake about it, OJA wants accountability, but we want accountability with maturity and growth and opportunity. We want the right service for the right kid, for the right duration, at the right time. We want the best services for kids because that's what we know is going to make a difference long term. If we want to reduce future crime and promote community well-being and safety. These are the types of services that we need. These are the types of approaches that are really going to make a difference. And so each person has a unique pathway that deserves individualized care. And a one-size-fits-all option is just never going to work. And so as a program, whether it be in the community, detention, level E, or medium secure, you're going to have a treatment program, but that program has to be flexible enough to think about, what is that right treatment? What is that right dose? What is the right setting that that kid needs to be in? How do we make sure that at night that kid's not hanging out with the wrong people? A one-size-fits-all approach doesn't meet the needs of kids. It's likely just in place because of the system. Our system right now doesn't require treatment programs to a great extent to involve families in weekly ongoing treatment, particularly within our residential care facilities. But we know, when you look at the research, engaging families, involving them in treatment, and giving kids supportive communities is one of the best things that helps reduce recidivism. And so each kid has this unique history, this unique neural network that is developed, and it is up to us to figure out, how do we fill in those gaps? How do we make those dark areas light up? How do we get to those neural networks to fill with meaningful connections that are going to help kids make better decisions? And so therapeutic connections, a lot of people talk about this, is, what is the best level of care? And is medium secure really higher levels of care? Or is level E really higher levels of care? Our system is not designed like the mental health inpatient system, where kids get outpatient, and then all of a sudden, if that doesn't work, maybe they get an intensive day treatment model, and then they go to an inpatient psychiatric facility. Juvenile justice systems are designed differently. It is designed to increase safety and security and hopefully level of care as kids go through that process. But it's really designed to increase the safety and security in medium secure and level E facilities that kids can't get at home. You can have a stronger level of care in the community than you do in residential care if you're involving the family, if you're seeing them multiple times a week, and if you're engaging with those community partners. And so I think it's a false narrative when people say, well, they need more treatment. They don't need more treatment, they need the right treatment. And I think that there's a difference between the two. Again, kids want to be seen, they want to be heard, and they want to know that you care about them. It's the simple elements of the human being that are really going to influence kids in the future. Again, this stress response that kids go through, every kid has a unique stress response. They can fight, they can freeze, they can run away. It is understanding and helping the kids understand that emotional response that's going to impact treatment. We need programs that are positive, that are focused on reinforcing appropriate behavior, that hold kids accountable, but really promote goals and opportunity that is going to help us in our system. It's about practicing what is helpful, what is needed, and what is appropriate that's truly going to guide youth in the future. And so these three elements around, you got to first help kids regulate, you got to help them relate, and then you have to help them reason. It is a system that says, if you're not regulated, I'm not going to get any further. If we don't have a connection yet, we can't do treatment. And so we have to, as a program, as a system, first help kids feel comfortable within the system, feel connected to us as adults, and then help them think through and act differently. So teen brains are hard to regulate. That's why we're in business. Again, teens are going to make poor decisions. Emotions are hard to describe, recognize, or even demonstrate for kids. So again, that's part of treatment, is helping them get to a point where they can truly understand and reflect and experience feelings. Because at first, they're just not going to be able to. They're not going to sit down and write an apology letter that is good because they don't have the skill set. It's not because they don't want to, it's because they can't. That's why we need to involve them in treatment. So, again, these are the reasons why it's so important for teens to get appropriate treatment when they get in trouble. And they need treatment providers. They need clinical professionals to come in and help people working with that teen to help them understand where that kid is and what they need first, whether it's to regulate, whether it's to relate, or whether it's to start working on those higher order functions. And so again, kids are resilient. They have the opportunities for growth. They are not fixed. That promise, that light bulb, you can be that person that keeps the lights on, that opens the door, that changes that kid's life for the next 50 years, 70 years. That is why I come to work every day, is that I believe in the potential that every day we have to influence the lives of the young people that we serve. Punishment-based program just simply doesn't work. We have 40 years of research where it's been tried. Right here on this slide, we see when it comes to recidivism, punishment-based programs that shift over, that means more kids commit more crimes in the future. Multiple services, community-based, restorative-based programs, less crime occurs. Surveillance has a semi-good opportunity to reduce recidivism, but it's not as good as treatment. Surveillance is just one part of programs. So punishment, things like boot camp style interventions, things like scared straight programs, taking kids to the adult jail, they're actually shown to make kids worse. That's why we don't give them. That's why we don't promote them. It is essentially like giving a medicine that you would know is a poison to the body. Why would we give kids a poison if we know it doesn't work? It does not make any sense. And so instead, treatment, working with the youth to understand how to engage in appropriate behavior, to be a good citizen that is forward-focused, not focused on the past bad decisions, but forward-focused on how do we make sure that you engage in appropriate behavior. Those are the types of interventions that truly reduce crime and keep our communities safe. So this is just another slide that's just talking about the different kinds of treatment. And what you're going to find is that things like mentoring, things like family therapy, and things like group therapy are the most impactful for kids. Individual, just meeting with kids individually, is shown to work the least. It doesn't mean it doesn't work, it just works the least when it comes to reducing future crime. And so reducing future crime really is going to benefit from engaging peers or engaging individuals with their peers because they're motivated, because they want their peers to know that, that again, they're kind of working, or engaging family, or engaging things like mentoring. The kinds of treatment that we know work over the last 40 years have to do with the brain that we already talked about. It has to do with how do we help kids regulate? How do we help kids relate and connect? How do we help kids reason logically? We call that cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive because it involves the brain. Behavior because we're practicing. We want kids to do what we practice so the brains can be developed. And treatment because, or therapy because it is treatment. It's rehabilitative. It meets the mission that juvenile justice was originally designed to promote. That again, we're treating kids different than adults. And even today, in our adult system, it's cognitive behavior therapy. It's keeping people in the community. It's giving them skill sets. It's giving them programs that is proven to reduce prison populations, but also to reduce crime. So most adolescents that touch juvenile justice, even those that touch our residential care or higher levels of care model, most kids will age out of crime. Most kids will go on to not become what is known as life course persistent, chronic, serious, or violent offenders. This graph on the screen demonstrates kind of the age crime curve. And it basically is a self-reported instrument, basically from 9-year-olds all the way kind of through adulthood. And what you're gonna see is that 13 and 14-year-olds engage in the most crime because they're going through puberty, because they have emotions that they can't control. Their brains are the least developed out of any of those kids. By the time we're hitting 16, 17, and 18, kids are getting a little bit better, but there's still quite a few kids that are engaging in illegal behavior. And then all of a sudden, by the time you hit 22, most crime is not going to be committed by the vast majority of the public. You're going to have a very few, or let me word this another way, very few percentages of the adult population are going to commit serious, violent, and chronic crime, even petty crime. You're just going to have a handful of folks that are doing that repeatedly into your 20s. By the time you reach 50, which again is the whole reason that long sentences in jail and prison is apart from giving them skill sets, after the age of 50, the odds of creating more additional violent, serious, chronic crime for most people dissipates because they're no longer 20 years old and they committed a murder. Now they're 50 and hopefully they have different skill sets and their bodies are responding differently on how they handle different emotions and different things within us. And again, you get wiser as you grow, is a kind of common saying. And so the question always comes back to, how do we really predict this? It is our goal to prevent crime and keep communities safe. So we need to have tools in order to predict which kid is at future risk and which kid is may cause harm within our society. And so we have tools that look at what is known as serious, violent, and chronic offenses. So the good news is that roughly 8% of youth that commit serious and violent crimes go on to commit more crimes in the future. This doesn't mean that they go on to commit more violent and serious crime. It just means that they go on to do things sometimes like petty larceny or, again, kind of boosting cars or whatever some other crimes are. But roughly 8% of people that commit serious or violent crimes go on to commit more crimes in the future. But if we dig into this a little bit more, what you see is that, again, you're going to have a handful of people that commit chronic crime. So chronic may be serious, may be violent, but most of it is not serious or not violent. It is, again, this kind of more lower level crimes that people commit. Very few people, less than 3% out of 4 states that did this analysis with this measurement tool of risk, less than 3% of kids, and in one state, like a fraction of 1%, and another one, 1%, 2%, less than 3% engage in serious, violent, and chronic offending. Again, chronic offenders that are not serious and violent or have some serious and violent chronic offending, again, is going to be a higher percent. Again, that's where that kind of 8% when it came to more state analysis came in. And then you're going to have a handful of kids that commit these violent acts, again, kind of 6 to 8%. And then your serious acts, you're going to have more kind of variation. And there was a difference in here where you looked at Pennsylvania. What they did in Pennsylvania is that the age of crime, or the statutory kind of regulations for crime, they had younger kids coming into their system, and that's why their numbers are so different than Connecticut, North Carolina, and Arizona. But the good news on this slide is that the vast majority of kids are non-violent, non-serious, and non-chronic offending. 2/3 or more. And so if we were to develop a system that is truly designed around rehabilitative needs for kids, we would see a pyramid that looks something like this. And I would like to think that our system is there, but we need to get better. We need the right treatments for the right kids, the right intensity. We need a variety of things. It's like when you go down the store at Walmart and you're trying to pick up Tylenol, how many different options do you have? Maybe you need Tylenol, maybe you need a leave, maybe you need to go to the doctor and get a prescription. We need a variety of treatments, and that's where other things come in. But the vast majority of kids can be served in the community safely. Some kids need out-of-home placement for a variety of reasons, oftentimes because of lack of supervision or lack of structure or the inability for that youth to be ready to hang out with a different skills or a different population of friends. If we're doing it right, less than 3% of our kids are going to grow up to be these serious, violent, and chronic offenders. And so these kids that are in this serious, violent, chronic offenders create the most crime, the most referrals into our system. And so how do we identify them early? We know that 80% of these kids touch DHS at some point in their life. How do we make sure that they're getting into treatment? There's nothing worse for me than getting a placement worksheet through OJA and reading, the kid is 16 years old, he's committed all of these crimes, he's had all this horrible child welfare experience, and he's received 0 treatment. How are we going to make improvements if we're not getting kids into programs, if we're not giving them support? So the good news is that this means that roughly 92% of kids are on a more positive trajectory. And so just because kids come to residential, just because kids come to medium secure, does not make them bad kids that are destined to make bad choices. It means that most of them can come in, can be rehabilitated, can connect to their communities, can make more positive decisions. But it's up to us, it's up to you, it's up to me to help build our programs to be rehabilitative and practice focused to give kids the skill set that they need. So we need a continuum of care from our youth service agencies across the state to our schools working on mentoring and coaching programs, to our residential care, to our medium secure care center. But we must work together because it's working together that we're going to be able to accomplish so much more for kids. And so how we impact or how we respond to kids when they commit crime, it has 2 different pathways. We can have a positive pathway where kids get back on track, we give them opportunities, or we can respond punitively and have a negative impact. And so when we come to work each day and we think about the kids' social, emotional, behavioral well-being, what they need to learn in treatment, they first need to learn how to be regulated. So that means we have to have the right environments. We have to give them the right level of food, nutrition, safety, sleeping arrangements. We have to set environments that are welcoming, that are friendly, that kids want to be in. And then we have to help them relate, which means that we have to say, hey, it's really good to see you today. I'm really happy to work with you. Thank you for participating with me today. Like, I look forward to whatever it is that's on your schedule. And you say, hey, you know what, if you have a problem, I hope that you can come and talk to me and we can work it out. Kids need to have that connection. They need to feel that they're connected to their treatment program, to their provider, to you. And so those are the ways that we can impact kids every day and positively change the trajectory for the rest of their life. So I throw this up just to have a couple of future dialogues. Is a study was done where they looked at diverting kids outside of the juvenile justice system. And in many states, the juvenile justice and mental health system have so much overlap that instead of treating kids through the juvenile justice system and in the courtroom, maybe we treat them in the mental health facility. And so if we treat them in the mental health facility and we look to say, you know, what do they really need? Do they need to go through court? What they found is that when they diverted kids, they got them into treatment, they gave them programs, the significant amount of kids that went through diversion did not reoffend, whereas kids that went through formal processing reoffended more often. And these were the same types of risk kids. It's not like they put the easy kids in the diversion category. They were the same kids, just like what we talked about with the outliers. They're the same kids, but they're given different opportunities. They're responded to differently. They found that kids that were diverted also had less school suspensions. Think about the impact. If kids enter the juvenile justice system and the school system knows about it, that kid is now labeled. That has impact, oftentimes a negative impact on kids, not a positive one. And so how do we make sure that we're setting kids up for success in our system? How do we make sure that if kids enter our system, that we are not doing further harm than what's already been done? So again, most kids that enter our system that are low risk, low rate behaviors should be served outside of juvenile justice. Youth with more serious, violent, and chronic patterns should receive the most attention because they are the kids that are committing the most illegal behavior in our communities. These are the kids that we need to catch at 12, 13, 14, and 15 because the longer we let them go on, the harder it is. It doesn't mean that we can't change 16, 17, 18, and 19-year-olds, but it's harder. It takes more time because they're ingrained in patterns of behavior at many points if they fall into this chronic kind of category. Just because a kid commits a violent or serious offense doesn't mean they need to be placed outside of the home. It means that we need to put in mitigating safety factors with the right treatment to see if we can make that work, because that's where kids are going to get better. We will always need our residential care partners and our medium secure care facility for kids that community treatment doesn't work. But I think that working together, we can reduce our population by at least a third if we have the right kind of community programs in place and the right system to serve kids in the best appropriate way. This is going to save our state millions of dollars. What we know is that sending kids to out-of-home care costs a lot of money, but sending kids to intensive day programs costs less. Sending kids to day reporting centers or evening reporting centers doesn't cost nearly as much. Even things like intensive treatment services in the community, things like multisystemic therapy or things like functional family therapy, don't cost our system as much. And so when kids are discharging from residential care facilities, hopefully they've received a lot of treatment. Hopefully those families have been connected, but many of them may still need programs to be successful in the future because now they need to practice in their real environment. If they never left home, they would have all that practice. And that's, again, we only want to send kids out of home when it's needed. So again, in the future, this is the question that I always come back to, regardless of what level of care I'm approaching, whether I'm working directly with kids or whether I'm working directly in the courtroom. What I care about and what I hope we all care about as a system is that it is our goal to promote child well-being. When we promote child well-being, we reduce future opportunities for kids to engage in crime. And when we do those two things, we promote the well-being and safety of our communities. And working together on all of these goals, we can achieve amazing results that have a system that truly serves kids in the most beneficial way. And so I look forward to working with you. I really appreciate the opportunity for you to invite me in to speak with you, to talk about adolescent development, to talk about trauma, to talk about OJA as a system, because we need to be looking toward the future of what does our system look like. It is 2020 right now. What is our system? We don't need a system that was designed in 1980. We need a system designed for today's youth that have mental health needs, that have significant trauma, and that, again, if given the right opportunities, can be highly successful. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it, and I can always be contacted and reached at my email address or my phone number. Again, thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you.